I was about to tell him everything: the bank accounts, the offshore trusts, the secret name under which my life was insured, when I heard words that made my whole body go cold. "Once she signs, we move. No witnesses. No questions." I froze. The speech I'd rehearsed for weeks evaporated. What I thought was a moment that would bind us forever was about to unravel into something I had never imagined. Hey, before we dive in, imagine trusting someone with your heart and finding out they were bargaining over your life in whispers. That's tonight's story. Stick with me, there are twists you won't see coming, and I promise the ending will make you rethink what loyalty really costs. People think wealth shouts. Mine whispered. No flashy cars, no oversized logos, no social media tagged vacations. At 36, I lived in a modest row house, in a part of the city where neighbors still borrowed sugar. I cooked. I laughed too loud at his jokes. I argued about broken cabinet doors. My hollowed-out life was, on purpose, small. By day, I ran a consulting company that paid my bills, and by night, I was the executor of a trust no one knew existed. My father, a private man and a genius at making things disappear into accounts and legal, Shells had died when I was 28. He left me a fortune and a condition: never let it change who I was. Unless I chose it myself, I agreed. I hid. It felt like a promise to him and a test for the people I let close. Daniel married me when I was pretending to be broke. He told me he loved the woman who paid for our groceries in cash. He liked the way I hummed while washing dishes. He hated my phone's voicemail messages because they sounded too formal. He called me M. He said he believed in small, honest things. We were 5 years in when I decided honesty had to be more than a virtue, it had to be a bridge. I wanted to tell him because I wanted a partner to carry the inevitable storms. I wanted him to know I'd been running from a truth that would change everything we were together. So I planned a quiet dinner, a small box with keys, the words that would turn the world, and Daniel, I need you to know something about my past. I had rehearsed it in the shower, the car, in my head until the syllables felt like a river I could step into and cross. That night, roses on the table, his favorite wine chilled, my throat dry. I slipped the envelope into my purse. I could taste the reveal like copper on my tongue. I told myself that if he loved the woman who washed dishes in an apartment that smelled faintly of lemon, he would still love the woman whose name was written on ledgers that could buy islands. I didn't expect to overhear a plan that would make me question everything. Daniel's laugh, a dry exhale I'd kissed 1,000 times, sounded different. She's never cared about numbers. She'll sign anything if she thinks it's for charity. My hands went cold. The spill of roses became a smear. I should have stormed out. Instead, I moved closer to the slightly open balcony door because some part of me believed there might be a misunderstanding. People say the mind substitutes horror for truth in the dark, but honestly, those words are what they were. I heard the click of a cigarette being pinched out. I heard Daniel say 2 names I didn't recognize and a location. I knew the old paper mill by the river. He came back inside 10 minutes later. He smiled in that way that had always been my undoing, gently, apologetically. I forced a smile like the flat script of the rehearsed speech I'd planned to give. The envelope remained in my purse, a hot stone at my thigh. That night I could not sleep. I did what I'd never done. I unlocked the first safety box in the trust, just to see if the numbers were where they said. The account names were coded. The balances were there. The legal binders thick, heavy contained power of attorney forms, contingency papers, everything a person could use to bind another. My throat closed. I felt like the stage had tilted under me. At dawn I did something reckless. I called in a favor from a man named Kareem, a private investigator I once hired to locate a missing contractor. Kareem owed me. Or rather, he owed my father. Favor returned, all clean, no questions. I heard him, I told Kareem, and explained in a single breath. Find Marco. Marco? Kareem asked. Why Marco? Because that's what his voice said on the balcony. It's a start. Kareem moved with the slow efficiency of someone who had seen marriages dissolve for less. He called me at noon. Daniel had met a man at the paper mill at midnight. There were photos, a low-resolution, grainy shot of Daniel stepping out of a black SUV, hands in his pockets, a hooded man near the lot with a cigarette. Kareem had the license plate of the SUV and a name, Marco Rinaldi. Marco Rinaldi. The name belonged to a man with a ledger of small crimes and big consequences. laundering rings, shell companies, front men for people who should remain anonymous. Hearing it beside Daniel's name felt like the room filling with smoke. I called Daniel on my way to the office and practiced sounding casual. He picked up in 2 rings, voice warm. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Fine," I lied. "Just tired. You're working too much. Let's take the weekend off." A generous hand at the back of my skull. I could see the itinerary of the conspiracy forming like a shadow. My choice then was clear in my mind as bone. I could confront him and watch him close off, deny, weave excuses. Or I could gather proof cold, irrefutable proof, and make a choice that gave me leverage. You don't get to be the secret holder by accident. You prepare contingencies. My father had taught me that in the quiet evenings when he'd sip tea and call a good lawyer, the first friend, I began to assemble mine. I didn't want to ruin him if there was a sliver of something other than betrayal. I also didn't want to step into a room blind, so I staged the reveal, but on my terms. That evening I told him I was finally ready. I set the table, opened a bottle, and let the candles drip. I let him sit with me and watch me smile. I said the things he deserved to hear without the weight of my fortune. How I loved the way his hair fell into his forehead. How I loved our small Sunday morning routines. How he had made me laugh when the world felt brittle. Then I opened the envelope and slid the keys in a small ledger across the table like a card trick. "You'll hate me," I said. "Maybe you'll love me differently. But I didn't want to keep this from you anymore." Daniel took the ledger. He read for 30 seconds and his face moved through expressions as light changed. Through glass surprise, calculation, then something like relief. He set the ledger down. "You proceed carefully," he said quietly. "That's smart." We sat. I waited for the confession, for fear, for the coldness that says I'd been misled. Instead, he reached for my hand. He whispered, "I knew in a way. You never asked me and I never asked you." "You knew?" The word came out thin. He nodded. "Not the numbers. Not the trusts. But I suspected. I'm not the kind of man I wouldn't choose cash over us." Relief surged through me like warmth. Then his phone vibrated on the table. He glanced down, brow tightening. He excused himself and answered in the hallway. I heard the barest hiss of him on the line. "Done?" "She's at the table."
"Keep it tight."
Something in my chest dropped again, the old trapdoors opening. I moved toward the hallway and stood outside the doorway, where my voice felt like a knife. There was the sound of shuffling paper. "We'll be in and out," Daniel said. "We don't need force." I stepped into the hall as if stepping into a river. He looked at me and his eyes were something I couldn't read. "Listen," he said, "I can explain." He tried to explain.
He told me there were people pressuring him.
People with names that made the floor feel unstable. He said Marco, the man Kareem had tracked, had been blackmailing him. He had borrowed money in a past he'd never told me about. A gambling debt that had threads. To people who don't ask for repayment, they ask for presents. He said he had been trying to buy us time. He said he was cleaning up a mess he brought into our life, and he had planned to sign over some rights temporarily to stall them. "And why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. "Because I thought I could fix it without dragging you into it," he said. "I thought I could make it right before you were harmed." I could hear his fear as if it were sound. It made sense, and the plan he described was messy, and human men make mistakes that spiral. But then there was a pause. His voice shifted. "There's more," he said. "If it's what you think, if the transfer happens tonight, it won't be small. It will put you at risk." "Risk from who?" I asked. "From someone who already knows how to find you?" He swallowed, then told me the name of a firm that had recently audited our charitable arm. He told me there'd been inquiries, not legal, but probing men asking questions about our lawyer, the safe codes, the trustees' backups. He said he was trying to buy time to talk to lawyers, to call Kareem, to set up a trap. I let him talk, and then I told him without drama that Kareem had photos of him meeting Marco at midnight. His face went white. He told me he had arranged the meeting but not to take my money. He had arranged to deliver a decoy ledger to a middleman to buy time. A decoy that looked legitimate enough that the people who wanted to pressure him would accept it and walk away. "You used my life as bait," I said. "No," he said. "I used a fake ledger to create a paper trail for someone else, to get the person who's really after you to come into the open." At that moment, fractured though it sounded, his plan seemed plausible. And the only solid thing I had left was the ledger in my hand and the scent of cigarette smoke in his jacket. If Daniel had been playing a double game, one of fear, one of redemption, then there was still someone else pulling strings. Kareem's photos had a third man in the background, a woman with a red scarf. Her face was shadowed. Kareem's informant recognized her as Tessa Wright, my father's former paralegal, the one who had vanished 2 years after his funeral. She'd been erased from every corporate record. Her disappearance was the kind of thing a careful person notices only once the history has a jagged edge. I called my lawyer, Claire, who had been my father's counsel. Claire was the kind of woman who kept her hair short and her answers shorter. She came over and examined the ledger, the decoy paper, and the photographed exchange. Then she said something that made my pulse strobe. Tessa is the one who taught Marco how to make a decoy look real, she said. She also knows how to trigger your legal springs. If she's involved, this isn't about Daniel's debt. It's about ownership. Ownership, a word that sounded less about bank accounts and more about the people who interpret ownership as a right to decide someone's fate. Claire set to work. She called the bank, the trustees, the auditors. She set up a decoy trust within a decoy trust and a team of lawyers to watch the transfers. She did the one thing I'd learned from my father. She tightened the screws and left the bait. She also set cameras at the mill and secured warrants with Kareem. That night at midnight, we waited. Tessa's eyes flashed with something like admiration. "You're cruel," she said. "And precisely. Your father would be proud." The hearing resulted in sentences and fines and redactions of hope for some of the players. Marco's trail went cold. Tessa pleaded guilty to fraud and was sentenced to years behind glass. But a twist remained. In court records later unsealed, a letter surfaced from Daniel, not public, but in the clerk's private pile, in which he confessed his failings and named those who had coerced him. He'd written it because he'd realized that the truth, once wielded as leverage, becomes a kind of freedom. He asked for mercy. I read that letter in the quiet of my office, and my vision blurred. For all his sins, he'd chosen confession as a kind of salvation. It didn't erase what he did or what he put me through, but it painted him as someone neither wholly villain nor wholly saint. Just a man who had been terrified and then tried to fix what he'd broken. So what did I do? I did the single thing my father taught me. I protected what mattered. I tightened the legal screws, I set traps, and when the time came, I forgave in measure and punished in measure. Daniel spent months rebuilding trust and racking up hours with a counselor. He didn't get to keep the ledger keys he'd hoped to use. I restructured the trust, named Claire as co-trustee, and put ironclad safeguards in place. But here's the twist you'll be waiting for. When the courtroom doors closed and the sentences were handed down, a new document appeared among my father's files. It was dated after his death, sealed in a way lawyers love and burglars fear. Inside was a note. If ever the ledger is threatened by love or greed, call the second trustee. The second trustee's name was not Claire. It was someone I had never expected. I'll tell you about that person and what they did next in the next video. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that secrets are dominoes. One falls, another topples, and before you know it, you've built a machine that either protects you or destroys you. If you want part 2, the one where the second trustee reveals themselves and the consequence is a choice that will split loyalties, hit subscribe, like the video, and comment what you'd have done in my place. Would you forgive? Would you punish? Or would you walk away and let your secrets burn to ash? Thanks for staying with me. I'll see you in the next one.